I didn't know a single sentence could reroute a life until she said it. 6 words, soft and shaking, dropped into the thick Ohio night and split my future clean in two. I was standing there half bare and dusted in sawdust, heart beating so loud it felt like it might give me away. And in that moment, everything I thought I knew about right and wrong, loyalty and want, cracked wide open. When Sandra asked me that question at 11 p.m. in her brother's workshop, I understood instantly that whatever answer I gave would echo for the rest of my life. Her name is Sandra and mine is Matthew. And 12 hours before that moment, I was just another guy finishing an HVAC shift, driving home through quiet streets, thinking about cold beer and sleep, completely unaware that one ordinary 4th of July weekend was about to change the shape of my heart forever. The day had started the way it always did, with heat already, pressing down before noon and the smell of charcoal hanging in the air like a promise. Eric's annual 4th of July barbecue was tradition, the kind you didn't question or skip. Same house we grew up in, same creaky steps and chipped siding, same backyard where we'd broken bones and learned how to bleed without crying. There were ribs sizzling on the grill, coolers sweating through their lids, and his mom's potato salad that people circled, like sharks because it never lasted long. I spent most of the afternoon doing what I always did, helping Eric rebuild the back deck where winter rot had eaten through the boards. He said someone was going to fall through it if we didn't fix it soon, and knowing our luck, he was probably right. So there I was, hammer in hand, sweat soaking my shirt, muscles burning in that honest, satisfying way that comes from making something broken solid again. Being useful had always been my comfort zone. Sandra had been back home for 6 months by then. I remembered her from before I left for tech school in Cincinnati, back when she always seemed untouchable, like someone who had life figured out early. Perfect hair, perfect smile, always dating men who wore expensive cologne and talked about careers like they were already written in stone. She'd been with Marcus for 3 years, a corporate lawyer who talked about quarterly projections at family dinners and made everyone uncomfortable without ever seeming to notice. Then one day she just came back. No Marcus, no explanation, living in her childhood bedroom. Like she'd pressed a reset button no one else knew existed. I noticed things even if I didn't say them. The way she sat on the porch with a book and never turned the page. The way her laugh sounded, like she was remembering how it used to feel, instead of actually feeling it. The way tired clung to her in a way sleep couldn't touch. I didn't ask because I wasn't supposed to. I was Eric's best friend. She was his older sister. That line had always been clear, solid, unbreakable. By 10:30 that night, the crowd had thinned, tail lights sliding away down the street, sparklers dying out in the grass. I stayed behind to finish sanding the deck boards, liking the quiet that came after everyone left. There was something honest about wood and nails. You could watch a thing go from weak to whole right in front of you. I'd taken my shirt off because the air was thick and heavy, sweat cooling on my back as string lights. Eric hung years ago cast everything in a soft amber glow. Somewhere down the block, fireworks cracked early, distant pops and whistles rolling through the humid dark. That's when I heard the screen door creak, slow footsteps crossing the grass. I looked up and saw Sandra standing there barefoot, wearing a white sundress dotted with tiny flowers, hair loose around her shoulders instead of pulled back the way she usually wore it, no makeup, just her face in the warm light, and it hit me harder than I was ready for. She was holding 2 beers. She offered one out. "Thought you might be thirsty," she said. I took it, fingers brushing hers, and thanked her. She didn't leave. She just stood there, watching me like she was trying to solve a puzzle she didn't have all the pieces for. "You're still here," she said quietly. "Deck's not finished," I answered, then added, "Where else would I be?" She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Most people leave," she said, and there was something raw underneath it, something I recognized because I'd heard it in my own head once before, back when my ex told me she'd been sleeping with my roommate for 2 months and I'd been too blind to see it coming. That hollow sound of realizing you'd been alone longer than you thought. "Eric said you and Marcus split," I offered carefully. Her jaw tightened. "He got engaged 6 weeks after we broke up," she said. "Posted it like we never existed. 3 years. She let out a short, bitter laugh. 3 years and I was just practice. I didn't try to fix it with words. I just stayed, met her eyes, let her see that I was listening. She drank, set the bottle down on the workbench, her hand shaking just enough that I noticed. "Can I ask you something?" she said, voice lower now. Urgent. Sure. She stepped closer. Close enough that I could smell her shampoo. Something clean and floral. Close enough that my heart started doing something dangerous. "Do you think I'm attractive?" The question landed heavy. "Sandra," I said, then stopped. "Just answer." "Yes," I said finally. "Because lying would have been cruel. You know you are." She nodded slowly like she was checking something off in her head. "Marcus used to schedule it," she said. "Tuesdays and Saturdays. 15 minutes. Like a dentist appointment." Heat flared in my chest, sharp and sudden. "He made me feel wanted," she continued, eyes locked on mine but never seen. "Does that make sense?" "It does," I said quietly. She moved closer, her fingers brushing my forearm, tentative. "I need to know I'm not broken," she whispered. "I need to know I can still feel something." Every instinct screamed at me to step back, to remember whose sister this was, to remember Eric, to remember every time I'd let my body outrun my heart. "Sandra," I started. She cut me off, voice trembling. "Can you make me come tonight?" The words hung between us, thick and inescapable. I could have said yes. Part of me wanted to. The part that remembered her in a bikini at the lake when we were younger. The part that noticed how her dress moved when she breathed. The part that was just a man standing, too close to a beautiful woman, asking him directly. But I'd been where she was. I knew what she was really asking for. And I knew what would happen if I gave it to her. So I reached for her hand, slow and deliberate, held it between both of mine, felt her pulse jump under my thumb. "Love always starts from the heart," I said. Her face crumpled, not in anger but in something worse. Relief and confusion tangled together. "That's not what I asked," she whispered. "I know," I said, "but it's what you need." A tear slid down her cheek and she didn't wipe it away. "I don't know how to do that anymore," she said. I don't know if I ever did. I pulled her into me, careful, feeling her collapse against my chest like I was the only solid thing left. She shook silently, fingers gripping my shoulders. "You're not broken," I murmured into her hair. "You just let someone convince you that you were." We stayed like that while fireworks cracked in the distance and the string lights swayed in the breeze. When she finally pulled back, her eyes were red but clearer somehow. "I should go inside," she said. "Okay." She turned, then stopped. "Matthew." "Yeah. Thank you for not." I watched her walk back toward the house, arms wrapped around herself, and stood there wondering if I'd just ruined everything or saved something I didn't even know I wanted yet. I didn't sleep. I replayed the night over and over until dawn bled gold into the sky. At 6, my phone buzzed. Sandra asking if I was awake, asking to talk, naming a diner. I pulled on clean clothes and drove through empty streets toward whatever came next, knowing nothing would ever feel simple again. The Riverside. Diner squatted at the edge of town like it had always been there and always would be. Red vinyl booths cracked from decades of use, chrome dulled by fingerprints, coffee that tasted burnt and familiar at the same time. Sandra was already inside when I pushed through the door, sitting in the back corner booth with both hands, wrapped around a mug as if warmth were something she had to hold on to. She wore an oversized Ohio State sweatshirt. I recognized instantly as Eric's from high school, the sleeves swallowing her hands, her hair pulled back in a loose ponytail that made her look younger and more fragile than I was used to seeing. I slid into the seat across from her, the vinyl squeaking under my weight, and for a moment neither of us spoke. The waitress came by without asking and topped off Sandra's coffee. Gave me a nod like she'd already decided I belonged there too. "I'm sorry about last night," Sandra said finally. The words rushed, like she'd been holding them in her mouth for hours. "Don't be," I said, shaking my head. "I put you in an impossible spot." "You asked for what you thought you needed," I continued gently. "I just think you deserve more than that." She studied me then, really looked at me, not the way people glance at someone they've known forever, but the way you look when you're trying to understand who someone actually is. "Marcus used to say I was too emotional," she said. "That I made things complicated when they didn't need to." A small smile tugged at my mouth before I could stop it. "Marcus sounds like an idiot." Her lips parted. Then she laughed, surprised, real laughter spilling out of her in a way I hadn't heard in months. "He really was, wasn't he?" The waitress returned, took our order even though neither of us was hungry, and left us with the low hum of the diner waking up around us. "Why did you say no?" Sandra asked after a while, her voice quieter now, more careful. I leaned back against the booth, choosing each word like it mattered because it did. "In college, I dated a girl named Amy," I said. "I thought I was in love. Gave her everything I had, one night. I came home early and found her with my roommate." The memory still had edges. Still scraped when I touched it. "After that, she told me she never loved me, that I was just convenient." Sandra's eyes softened, sympathy written plainly across her face. "I promised myself I'd never let someone use me like that again," I went on. "But more than that, I promised I'd never do it to someone else. Last night you weren't asking for me. You were asking for proof that you weren't what Marcus made you feel like. And I'm not interested in being someone's proof." She was quiet for a long time, fingers tracing the rim of her mug in slow circles. "Then what are you interested in?" she asked finally. I met her eyes, held them. "Getting to know you," I said. "The real you, not the version trying to fix herself." She swallowed, nodding faintly. "I don't know if I remember who that is." "Then we figure it out," I said. The word hung between us, fragile and hopeful. "What does that mean?" she asked. "It means we start from scratch," I said. "No expectations. No pressure. Just two people seeing what's there." She frowned slightly. "Eric would lose his mind." "Probably," I admitted. "But we don't have to tell him anything yet. Not until we know if it's real." She thought about it, chewing on her lip the way she did when she was nervous, then nodded. "Okay," she said. "Okay." And just like that, something shifted. Over the next 2 weeks, we fell into a rhythm that felt both easy and intentional, like we were laying bricks one at a time, making sure each one was solid before moving on. I'd pick her up in the mornings before work, not at Eric's place, but at the coffee shop down the street, and we'd drive. With the windows down, no destination, just talking. She told me about her interior design dreams, how the firm downtown drained her, how she wanted to build spaces that felt safe. I told her about my work, about the satisfaction of finding a problem and fixing it, about how following refrigerant lines felt like solving a puzzle. We met for quick lunches in the park when I could get away, sitting close on a bench, shoulders brushing but nothing more. Evenings I'd text her when I was done for the day, and we'd walk by the river, watching the sun slide down behind the trees. I didn't kiss her. Every time the moment felt close, I took her hand instead, feeling her pulse under my thumb. "You're torturing me," she said once, laughing as I squeezed her fingers instead of pulling her closer. "Good," I said. "Means you're feeling something." She rolled her eyes but smiled, and the smile stayed. Eric started to notice. "You've been in a good mood lately," he said one afternoon as we worked on his truck. "You get lucky or something?" I nearly dropped the wrench. "No," I said too quickly. He squinted at me. "You've got that look, the one you had freshman year." My stomach dropped. Sandra came out with lemonade, handed him a glass, then me, our fingers brushing just long enough to make my chest tighten. Eric watched us a little too closely after that. The clock was ticking, and I knew it. 2 nights later, Sandra texted me late. "Can you come get me?" I was there in 5 minutes. She climbed into my truck, eyes bright with anger. "Marcus showed up," she said, "with his fiancée." I drove without asking where. Ended up at the lake where we'd spent summers as kids. We sat in silence for a while, listening to crickets and distant traffic. "I used to think love was supposed to hurt," she said softly. "That if it didn't, it wasn't real." "That's not love," I said. "That's damage pretending to be depth." She turned toward me. "Then what is it?" I thought of my parents, of the way my dad made my mom coffee every morning. "It's choosing someone," I said, "over and over, even when it's boring, especially then." She looked at me like the words were landing somewhere deep. "Have you ever felt that?" she asked. I looked at her, really looked at her, and nodded. "I'm starting to." She leaned forward, resting her forehead against mine, and when I kissed her, it was slow and gentle, like we'd earned it. The kiss felt different than anything I'd known, calmer, deeper. "I'm falling in love with you," she whispered. My heart stopped, then started again. "Good," I said, "because I already am." We talked until dawn. tangled together in my truck. No rush, no pressure, just being. When Eric finally found out, he didn't yell. He just looked at me and said, "You better be serious." I was. Eric didn't say anything else that day, but I could feel the weight of his awareness every time he looked my way, like a quiet audit of every move I made. Sandra noticed it too, the way his eyes lingered a half-second longer, the way his jokes landed a little flatter when she was in the room with me. We didn't talk about it. Not directly, but it hovered there. The unspoken truth that what we were doing had an expiration date on secrecy. Still, the weeks that followed felt suspended outside of time. Like we'd stepped into a pocket of calm the rest of the world couldn't touch. Sandra started to look lighter, not in a superficial way, but like someone who'd been carrying a heavy coat for years and finally set it down. She laughed more, real laughter that surprised her sometimes, the sound catching in her throat before spilling out. She slept better. She stopped apologizing for things that didn't need apologies. I watched it happen quietly, carefully, afraid that if I named it out loud, it might disappear. We kept building what we had the same way I fixed systems at work. Methodical, patient, refusing to rush even when it would have been easier to do just that. Some nights we talked for hours, sitting on the hood of my truck or walking until our legs ached, unraveling stories we'd never told anyone else. She told me about how Marcus used to correct her in public. Little things, how she pronounced a word or how she told a story, always with a smile that made it seem harmless until it wasn't. I told her about my dad, about losing him young, about how I learned early, that love was something you showed, up for even when it scared you. Other nights we said almost nothing, just existed in the same space, comfortable with the quiet. Those were the moments that convinced me most. Anyone could be charming in conversation. Silence was the real test. One evening, after a long day of service, calls that left my hands aching and my shirt streaked with grease, I picked her up from the coffee shop like usual. She slid into the passenger seat, handed me a paper bag. "What's this?" I asked. "Dinner," she said. "You forget to eat when you're tired." Inside were sandwiches. She'd made herself simple and perfect. I glanced at her, something warm settling in my chest. No grand gestures, no performance, just attention. That was the thing that kept catching me off guard. She paid attention to how I took my coffee, to the way I liked the radio low when I drove at night, to the fact that I always checked my mirrors twice. And I found myself doing the same, memorizing the small things about her. The way she chewed on her bottom lip when she was thinking, the way she tucked her feet under herself when she sat, the faint scar above her eyebrow from when we were kids. It felt less like falling and more like recognizing something I'd been circling my whole life. The night Eric finally said something, it wasn't dramatic. No shouting, no slammed doors. We were in his garage, tools spread out, the smell of oil heavy in the air. Sandra was inside with his mom, helping clean up after dinner. Eric wiped his hands on a rag and leaned against the workbench, eyes fixed on me. "So?" he said, casual in a way that wasn't casual at all. "You and my sister." My heart thudded once, hard. "Yeah," I said. He nodded slowly. "How long?" "A few weeks." He exhaled through his nose. "You know this complicates things." "I know." He studied my face like he was looking for cracks. "You hurting her?" "No," I said immediately. "I'd never." He was quiet again, then said, "You better not. I won't." Another pause. "She's different lately," he said. "Happier. She deserves that," I said. He looked away, jaw tight. "If this goes sideways—" "It won't," I said, not because I was arrogant, but because I was certain. He met my eyes again, and something shifted. "If you're serious," he said slowly, "then you have my blessing." "If you're not—" "I am," I said. He nodded once. That was it. The weight lifted in a way I hadn't realized I'd been carrying. When Sandra found out later that night, she cried, the good kind, relief pouring out of her in shaky breaths as she wrapped her arms around me. "I was so scared," she admitted. "Me too," I said into her hair. From that point on, we stopped hiding. Not because we needed to prove anything, but because it felt dishonest not to. We showed up together at family dinners. We sat side by side at bonfires and football games. People noticed, of course. Some eyebrows raised, some whispers followed. But none of it mattered the way I'd thought it would. What mattered was the way Sandra reached for my hand without thinking. The way she leaned into me when she laughed. The way her eyes searched for mine in a crowded room. 3 months later, she moved into my studio apartment. It was small, barely big enough for one person, but we made it work. Combining lives the way you combine furniture in a tight space. Shifting, adjusting, making room. She brought plants that somehow stayed alive. I made space in the closet. We argued occasionally about dishes or schedules or nothing at all, but even our disagreements felt different, rooted in care instead of fear. 6 months in, I took her back to the lake, the same spot where we'd first named what was happening between us. The water was calm, reflecting the late afternoon sky, and for a moment I just watched her. The woman who'd once asked me to prove she wasn't broken, now whole in a way that took my breath away. I got down on one knee before I could talk myself out of it. She gasped, hands flying to her mouth, tears already forming before I even opened the box. "Sandra," I said, voice unsteady, "I choose you. Every day. Will you marry me?" She didn't hesitate. "Yes," she said, laughing and crying all at once. A year later, we stood in Eric's backyard under those same string lights. Friends and family gathered, the air warm and full of something like promise. When she walked toward me, I thought my heart might actually burst. We said our vows with shaking voices, words simple and true. And when it was over, when the music started and people cheered, Eric pulled me into a hug and clapped my back hard. "You did good," he said. Now every night, no matter how the day has gone, I kiss her forehead before we fall asleep and whisper the words that started it all. Love always starts from the heart. And every night she smiles and whispers back, grateful and sure, the years that followed didn't feel like a dramatic montage or a highlight reel. And that was exactly the point. Life settled into something steady and real. The kind of love that doesn't announce itself, but proves its strength in the quiet moments no one else sees. We built routines that felt like rituals. Sunday mornings with coffee on the floor because the couch was still too small. Evenings where she sketched. Ideas for rooms she dreamed of designing, while I traced ductwork. Diagrams at the kitchen table. We learned each other's silences. The difference between needing space and needing closeness. The way stress made her retreat inward and the way I talked too much when I was worried. There were bad days. Days when work went wrong or money felt tight or old insecurities crept back in. But even those days ended the same way. With us choosing each other again, choosing not to run. Sandra took a job at a small local firm that let her actually design instead of just execute someone else's vision. And I watched her come home with color swatches and excitement in her eyes instead of exhaustion. I started my own HVAC business. Small at first, just me and a truck. But she believed in it with a certainty that made me believe, too. When things got hard, when I questioned whether I was good enough, she reminded me of who I was when I'd held her shaking hands under string lights and refused to let her settle for less than she deserved. We grew into the kind of partnership where love wasn't a question mark anymore, but a foundation, solid and dependable. On quiet nights, when the house was dark and the world finally slowed down, she'd curl into my side and trace idle patterns on my chest. And sometimes she'd whisper, almost to herself, that she still couldn't believe how different she felt. How safe. I never took that lightly. I never forgot the night it all started. The weight of that question, the way it could have gone so wrong if I'd chosen my ego over my heart. Every anniversary we went back to the lake, sat on the same dock, watched the water move in slow, patient ripples. A reminder that the best things take time. When we talked about that first night now, years later, she'd shake her head and smile softly, saying she couldn't recognize the woman she'd been then. The one who thought being wanted was the same thing as being loved. And I'd tell her the truth every time. That she'd always been strong, even when she didn't feel like it. That all she'd needed was someone willing to see her clearly and stay. On our wedding anniversary, under the same backyard lights that once framed a moment of uncertainty, Eric raised a glass and joked about how he'd never doubted us for a second, and we all laughed because we knew that wasn't true. But we also knew it didn't matter anymore. What mattered was this life we'd built, piece by careful piece, rooted in respect and patience and a choice made from the heart. And every night, as the world quieted and the day faded, I'd kiss her forehead, the same gentle promise in the gesture, and say the words that had changed everything. Love always starts from the heart, and she'd whisper back, with a certainty that still felt like a gift. Thank God you knew that before I did.